In which case, I suppose we do need to say that we are recording for the purposes of, collecting this as a documentation of one of our network events. So if you don't want to be part of the recording, please feel free to turn your cameras off. We will not have it on at the very end when we go into smaller conversations.
Great. And also, if you do require captions, there's a button down at the bottom that says more. And if you click on there, you can get audio captions in a range of languages. I think there are some people in the waiting room. If somebody could let them in, that would be great. While I just skip through, really, some of the context for this evening. A pluriverse really describes a world of many worlds. And on our website, www.dancingotherwise.com, you can find out more about the Pluriverse and about our activities so far. Okay, I'm just allowing the recording there. Yeah, so we have been on a journey really since last December. And we have worked through mapping the pluriverse, choreographing the pluriverse, dancing the pluriverse, exploring learning from nature, and enacting the pluriverse, which is where we end up here. So looking at how we can organize ourselves in relation to our dance-related work, but also how we can organize and design our worlds otherwise, learning from the practices that are embedded within our dance work and research. So we're now turning our attention to enacting the dance pluriverse, exploring strategies for organizing otherwise. Over to Michelle.
Okay, thank you. So we have invited 4 different speakers to join us this evening, and the speakers have we all consider that they're working in ways which are both inside and outside of the field of dance. And our contributors, they all have different ways of enacting and applying ideas of pluriversality in quite pragmatic ways. So we've asked them to talk about that and their practice in relation to their own fields and practice. We've asked each speaker to introduce themselves. If you'd like further details of any of the speakers, then that can be found on our website, of which there's a link in the chat, and also in the Eventbrite link, which you would have received when you've booked your ticket. And in terms of the structure for how this evening is going to work, the first part of our evening runs from 5 till 6, and that's with our first contributor, Suzanne Aline. She is going to be talking about her practice, and at the end of that, there's going to be some chance for some Q&A, some comments and some discussion. And then we've planned a break at 6 o'clock. So at 6, there'll be a 15-minute break where we urge you to stretch your legs and get away from your computer if you can. And then when we return at 6:15, we're going to hear from our other 3 contributors, so Liz King, Julia Casalini and Carl J. Lewin, and they will each take a turn to share ideas and processes from their practices, and then in conversation and in dialogue with questions or comments you might have, there'll be some time for some discussion then. And then the last part of the evening runs from 7:30 till 8, and there we have decided to organise some breakout rooms to have some smaller conversations, and Daniela is going to talk a little bit more about that now.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. But first of all, you will have received some information with your e-ticket, although maybe if you book today, you want to, so I'll tell you now about how you can participate and share ideas during this event. So we are asking you to put questions in the chat and any comments in the chat, because there is enough of us to kind of keep monitoring it. You will see from the schedule, so each session will have a chair and a Zoom monitor. So the chair's role is to open questions and maybe offer some of their own, and then the Zoom monitor will draw their attention to questions, comments, or suggestions that have been provided by you in the chat. So please use it as frequently as you wish. For the last part, as Michelle mentioned, so from 7:30 GMT time, I don't know if any of you are joining from a different time zone, we will divide into breakout rooms for smaller discussions just for the period of 15 minutes. So We will use this opportunity to discuss the evening's ideas and content with other people and with members of the team. And then we will rejoin back together for the final 15 minutes to sum up and draw some final reflections together. So we've decided to organize it like this to give a different dimension to the discussion. It's good to be speaking as a whole virtual room, but it's also good to try out a different format. So we wanted to have the opportunity for more nuanced discussion and smaller conversations so that you can draw on your own experience more directly and maybe feel more comfortable sharing how the themes that we will discuss tonight resonate with you, with your own work, and how you can kind of put them into action in your own practice. Vicky.
Thank you so much. I've also just put in there a PDF, because I know that sometimes when we get further into the evening, the chat disappears and you might miss the timetable. So if you want the timetable, there's a PDF there that's got the schedule for this evening and also the questions. So you might find that useful. Just for information, the questions that we'll be organising our discussions around will be: in which ways did the themes discussed today resonate with your experience and practice in your own respective contexts and fields? Are there any ideas and practices discussed today that you feel you could take forward or adapt to your context? And any other thoughts and comments? And it's not a test. It's not a test to see whether you were paying attention. It's not a test to see whether you have something deeply theoretical or erudite to say. It's an opportunity to feedback to one another and also to the speakers, and to kind of get a sense of what do we gain from these collective endeavors, from these collective conversations. So it's not solely about, talking at you, but hopefully it's an experience of talking with you and discussing and seeing how we might be together and enact things, work differently. So I think we've been rather efficient. I'm quite pleased with the timekeeping so far. We can now pass over, if everyone's happy and ready, or if there are any questions thus far, do raise a hand and let me know. So we're going to hand over to our keynote speaker in a moment. Up to you whether once Melanie and Suzanne start to share the screen, whether you want to keep your own screen on or whether you want to mute yourself and turn your screen off, that's your camera off, that's also fine. So whatever you feel comfortable doing. Also with the chat comments, we are in a space that we try and aim to make safe. Obviously that means something different to everybody, but I do ask that we can treat each other with respect in terms of comments and questions, and just try and enact some of the pluriversal sentiment that we've been exploring throughout this network in the ways that we converse with one another and respond to whatever offerings or sharings or provocations come up this evening. And once again, it's a busy time. It's been a very busy day, and we are really truly grateful to have you here join us in this space for these next couple of hours. So, Daniela, over to you.
Thank you, Vicky. I suppose I also wanted to say this particular event, I would say, has been particularly strongly informed by the work of the Gesturing Towards the Colonial Future collective, and also, but not only, because we had originally invited Vanessa de Oliveira Andreotti to speak with us tonight about her work that draws on the work that she does with the collective, and also the work that comes out very clearly from her book, Hospice in Modernity. So Vanessa talks a lot and writes a lot about how we need to learn to kind of navigate the complexities of letting go and kind of letting the current system that she calls modernity, that we can call modernity, kind of find its own death and kind of accompanying accompany it to its own death, whilst also learning how to sow the seeds for a new way of being in this world. And this work and the work of the collective that she's one of the co-founders on, is definitely resonates very strongly with our own inquiry as part of this network, especially at this point, because having grappled with questions and problems over the last many months since last October, we are at a point where we want to ask how do we engage with the in-between? How do we engage with complexity? How do we deal with paradoxes? How do we make room for this and that, even when they seem to be in tension with our own desires to shape practices in a certain way, and the ways in which institutional contexts and structures, seem to make it impossible. And the book Hospice in Modernity really offers a series of really strong tools about how we can learn to be with contradiction and to navigate the in-between in ways that feel to us that are very hands-on. Unfortunately, Vanessa has had to cancel for her participation tonight because of medical reasons, which we are very sorry about, but we thought we already had such an amazing pool of presenters that we'd already asked to be part of this, that we decided that we would go ahead with the team as we had already assembled. So we asked Suzanne, Aline to, we gave each of them more time, and especially Suzanne, because we realized that her work also on power and the neurology of power really resonates with the themes that we want to explore. I just wanted to mention this because some of you may have noticed or may not, or may be puzzled right now about the change in the in the schedule, if you hadn't realized that there had been one. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Susanna. I hope that's okay that I'm kind of taking the time to introduce you, Susanna. Would you rather do it yourself? Okay. So Suzanne is the founder and CEO of Aline End, a cultural consultancy and research incubator whose work centers on leadership, power, and societal issues. She is an inaugural Arts Council England Changemaker and Churchill Fellow. She's also a fellow of the RSA, director of What Next, and a guest lecturer at King's College London. Her innovative project, Neurology of Power, explores the dynamic of power in the brain and the body. Suzanne has 30 years of experience in this sector with work that explores creating solutions to develop a more sustainable, equitable, and resilient society. So for all of these reasons, we've warmly invited her to share her experience with us tonight, and we look forward to her talk and to engage in conversation with her. When you're ready, Suzanne, we really welcome you to open our evening tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniela, and thank you for the invitation. For those that it's useful, I am a Black woman. I'm wearing transparent glasses. I'm wearing a grey top. I have lilac-y lipstick on, and I have 2 pictures in the background. I'm actually not going to delve any further into who I am for the moment. What I'm going to do instead is, firstly, let you know that I'm going to speak for around 35 minutes, and then there should be 25 minutes to have a Q&A. I invite everybody who wants to put a timer on for 35 minutes. I'm neurodiverse, and it's really, really helpful to be embarrassed by a timer and know that you have to finish. And I also work collaboratively, and this is one way of doing that. I also deeply invite you to relax. There is really nothing for you to do other than relax and listen. And if you miss something, you can ask me, you can message me after. Part of power is about being able to center yourself. And I'm sure that for a lot of us, our day doesn't allow that. So actually, that's my first invitation. I want to, for anyone that's useful, tell you that I'm going to split this really into a section of 3s. We're going to do an opening, And I want to do a bit of scene setting so that we start from the same page. And then I'm going to do a bit of text science stuff. I'm going to say, first time of many, I'm not a neuroscientist. And then I'm going to kind of bring that funnel down a little and start thinking about how it might be applied in business, academia, and wider society. So when I started talking to Daniela and team, the thing that came to me straight away was, where are we starting from? And I'm going to go off my own little script, and I'm going to bring you into a pre-conversation where some of us came on and were like, how are you? And it was like, and I think in many ways that could be taken as maybe a response to the election. So it feels like I can't have this conversation today without acknowledging the election and power. And I think it's really interesting when we think about a pluriverse, when we think about space, when we think about cohabiting, some of the assumptions that we make. The arts, by definition, and certainly the funded arts, where I spend a lot of my time, speaks loudly about being left-leaning and liberal. But I've chaired meetings where people have come to me almost mortally embarrassed, saying, I lead an organisation, and actually I voted Brexit and there's no space for me. And so I think whatever your views are on the election today, it's a really good moment. It's a real life, in real life, not theoretical moment to think about, how do we all engage? How do we cohabitate together? And so my questions for you are, where are we starting from when we have this conversation? My answer for me is, I know that I start at very different points to even the people I work with, much less the people in this room. I have different beliefs, I may have different values, I may have a different lived experience. And I think one of the things that's really important for me is to try and bring as much of that to bear as I can. And then we were thinking about ecology in a broader sense. The dance ecology, what are we talking about? Are we talking about within academia? Are we talking about dance and business? Are we talking about dance and society? Are we talking just about who gets to dance? Whose body is policed? By whom? Who gets to decide what's researched? What's valid? What's not? And what I'm going to talk about in the third part very briefly really is a broader ecology of my belief system, which is that so much is interconnected. So that's really where we're starting. I invite you just to think about who you are, what your beliefs are, what you're bringing to this table. But ultimately, I've distilled the entire brief for this section into one sentence for me. How can we collaboratively build a more resilient, sustainable, and equitable dance ecology? How can we do that? How can we each take individual and collective responsibility? So still in this opening section of setting the scene, who am I? As I said, as Daniela nicely introduced me, my name's Suzanne. I'm a founder of Ali Nandi, which is an organisation. I didn't found an organisation because I have this mad career ambition. I only founded an organisation because I couldn't find one that could house me. I couldn't find one that shared my values. I couldn't find one that was okay with my neurodiversity. I couldn't find one that was okay with my lived experience of mental health and trauma. I couldn't even find one that understood my allergies meant I couldn't be in a place with carpet. And I share all of that because in this modern moment that we are talking about an ecology, it is both broad and it's very nuanced. So in setting up my organisation, I wanted to look at everything through the lens of power. I'm just going to pause here and say, if you can see a screen with just an A and logo, that's part of our logo. And behind that beautiful screen is Melanie. So as a CEO, I have to have access support. I talk about it a lot publicly because I feel that we pretend that CEOs don't need this support, and I do. So Melanie's going to be sharing, and I'm going to do my best to preempt her so it's not a big shock when I need her to share the screen. So Melanie, in a couple of seconds, once I've talked about our 4 strands, I'll ask you to share. Within AHRC, we have 4 strands: research, consultancy, artistic practice, and policy adjacent. And I'm giving you those because at the end, I'm going to talk to you about, for me, everything is super interconnected. Every single thing we do, we look through the lens of power. Why? Because a few years ago when I was at uni, I had this epiphany. I just thought about all the times I felt powerful, I did well, the world felt great. And I realized I felt like I was imbued with power, and I had a really awful moment where I didn't. And I felt like I had been stripped of my power. So it started me going, what is power? Like, not that kind of like, I can dance for ages beautifully, but like the feeling, the emotion. And where might it be in our brain and our body? And I didn't even mean it from a sociological perspective. I wanted to know scientifically what that was. And before we delve into that, Melanie, if you could open up to share, I thought it'd be quite interesting for you.
Power.
Don't say yet. I thought it'd be quite interesting for you if I gave you some definitions of power. And what I invite you to do, the reason I've shared this and not just said it myself, is I want you to see who's saying what. It's a series of talks. You can watch them for free. These are just excerpts. Melanie, off you go. How would you describe power?
Power is the ability to control or influence the outcomes of other people or even your own outcomes.
Is being able to not be directed by people and not be directed by events.
It's not just a question of who has power, though that's very interesting, but how they exercise that power.
Thank you, Melanie. And so for me, it's always about the nuance, right? So for my friend Roger, who's a poet who I was in conversation with, for him, it was very much about what he doesn't have to do that others want him to do. For Lisa Feldman-Barrett, who's this incredible neuroscientist, she's more interested in that academic, this is technically what it is. And for Margaret Atwood, who many of you will know as the author of The Handmaid's Tale, who I got lucky enough to talk to me about that another time, she, whose work is all about power, was very much about not just the definition, but how we use it. And that's really what my talk and my keynote is about today. So that's it. That kind of sets the scene. I guess you could ask, though, why am I interested in dance? I got a chance in the consultancy, we got a chance to do a brand identity for Rambert, who many of you know is a brilliant dance organisation. And I've also had a chance to sit with them quite a lot over the last couple of years. And it really brought so much to my fore. At its simplest for me was this notion that you could be a dancer on stage in the public eye, and you could have feelings, and your body was essentially controlled by a choreographer. And so it started me thinking about agency over one's body, dance. It's so visceral, it's so visual what we see. And so for me, it's a bit of a trigger warning. I come from a background of trauma. The idea of someone else getting to choose what my body does and by default how I feel feels really, really important. And in that sense, I think you in the dance world have so much to share with people, because you are talking about something that for so many is huge and basic, the body. And so when we think about the ecology, my questions to you are, again, who's getting to do what? Who is only allowed to do participation as a school? Who is allowed to be the CEO of a dance company? What do lecturers look like in a university? I think we really have to ask all of those questions. So look, let's talk about power itself. Again, I'm going to preempt this. I am an independent academic, and so what I'm trying to do in this talk is give you things that are anecdotal that I know through my business, but I'm also wanting to tell you when things are cited and it comes from academia. And even the things that are cited and coming from academia, from a neuroscience point of view, every neuroscientist will tell you there is no such thing as fact. There is only what a lot of evidence points to at the moment. And so the next bit that I'm going to talk about, really have that in mind. This is what we know at the moment. At one point, people believed the earth was flat and they were scientists. So, you know, it all evolves. And I want to think about, first off, who are we as humans and why might it be helpful to think about power and the body? Melanie, over to you. And I should say, before Melanie starts, the clicks that you're seeing are all from a conversation that I had, series of conversations with Barbican, that we organised that they could all be online for free. These are clips. This is Lisa Feldman-Barrett, who's a world-leading neuroscientist, top 1% cited on emotion. So there's your context. Melanie, over to you. Who are we as humans and why is it helpful to think about that?
Once you understand a little bit about how your brain works, it really invites you to think about what kind of human you are and what kind of human you'd like to be. So it invites you to think about human nature in a broader sense. And part of human nature is that we're social animals. And that means that we're constantly influencing each other. We influence each other's actions, but we also influence each other's physical health. We influence our nervous systems, often synchronize with each other. And so to me, as a neuroscientist, understanding something about how your brain works in conjunction with other brains is really an opportunity to think about your influence on other people and their influence on you. As I've said a number of times, you know, neuroscience instructs us that the best thing for a human nervous system is another human. And the worst thing for a human nervous system is also another human. And so to me, ideas about power are directly fall, you know, in this intersection of our influence on one another and at a neural level and also at a behavioral level.
Thank you, Melanie. So I'm going to speed through things. I'm going to try and make a few things intersect, interlink, and make sense. Here's the first thing that we know from neuroscience, and I would imagine other disciplines. As humans, predominantly, not all of us, we want to think we're kind. And that has all sorts of influences over how we behave. 2, when I talk about this, people's shoulders drop with relief. What I want to do is give yourself a little bit of break. Let's not talk about the shame of who gets this and who doesn't get that. Just for a moment, let's understand that sometimes parts of our brain and our body might be pre-programmed. So here's a little explanation, a little ditty. If parts of this you can't hold just because there's too much, then I will write something up and pass it on, but I'll try and make it simple. So first off, humans want to be kind. Second off, currently neuroscientists understand a little bit about the relationship between power and empathy. It may or may not come as a surprise to know that often the more power that you have, the less empathy. Empathy, the ability to understand what someone else is going through. I've got a bit of a different definition of empathy. It's not the right one. Not just understand what someone's going through, but then behave appropriately. Because without the behavior, for me, what's the point? So if you've got more power, often, not always, you've got less empathy. 2, prediction. I think a lot of people on this call may know why we predict. We predict to save our body energy. If I have to think, is this a laptop? Is that a person? Is this a pencil? It saps our body of energy. So we predict for a very good reason. 3, actually our brain has one overriding function. It's not to think, it's not to dream, it's not to love. It is there to keep you alive. And so the reason in part that it predicts is something called allostasis, or the simple term that Lisa Feldman Barrett taught me is body budgeting. Now, I think, Melanie, I'm going to pass slide 3 so you can move on from that, and I'm going to talk about body budgeting myself. Your body, your brain says, I have to keep this person alive. So let's think about it in pennies. Let's imagine your body is one of those old-fashioned Coca-Cola bottles that if you're a person of a certain age, you used to get one and you put pennies in to save your money. So that's your body. Let's imagine that your body could have a maximum of, I don't know, 1,000 pennies. That's your energy. Some of us might have 700, some of us might have 500, but this is what your brain knows. Your brain knows if you go under 300 pennies, you will die. So essentially what your brain is trying to do is it's trying to manage all of its resources, much like we might do a food budget. So it's sort of going, right, if I have to use energy for my nervous system or for any of the other systems, what is that cost? And it's always trying to balance the books. So here's the thing about body budgeting. So for me, I go more recently to the gym, I do yoga, I don't like yoga, but I know I feel better from it. I try to go to bed early. I know all of those things are putting pennies into my own body. When I'm having a conversation, this conversation, it is either taking pennies out or putting pennies in. For me, I quite like these conversations. I get quite nervous, but I'm going to hazard a guess I'm putting pennies in. So far, you might be with me and all that makes sense. Here's the bit that blew my brain. So go find Lisa Feldman Barrett afterwards. She'll say it's true. We don't just put pennies in our own body. We put pennies in other people's bodies as well. Now, this is where it gets interesting, right? So over long periods of time, not short periods of time, how you treat others, how you work with others, how you interact with those at home, how you interact with people in the street is actually adding or taking away from their body budget. And for me, when I think about dance, it becomes especially visceral. When I think about who gets to run a dance company, who gets to decide, now we can start asking ourselves questions. Who's balanced? Who's dropped of energy when they've come out? I want to give you another couple of ideas, and then we're going to link them together. One is about democratic feudalism, and I have a very nasty habit of taking a definition and then stretching it or changing it. So there's lots of definitions about democratic feudalism. But the one that I want to think about is the idea that you have to think about place and situation. And for me, not academically, but professionally, personally, I have this view that England has a lot of problems because historically and culturally, those in this country were born into and taught and believe that actually a very few have power and the rest of us are in service. So democratic, because we do vote for people. Feudalism, because really, are we really? Like, do we really, how much responsibility? And for me, that explains a lot why during COVID, some people were able to quite frankly take the bleep, drive up and down, and we were like, oh, well, you know, they're politicians, that's what happens. And I think we're now understanding how our history travels through our ancestors and our previous people's bodies into our own. And so we inherit beliefs. And so for me then, the final part of this is around neuroplasticity. So when I was younger, there was an understanding or a belief that you got to kind of adult. What was that? And then you stopped being able to learn and new things. We now know that's not right. It's neuroplasticity. It's how you can change habits, change your views. And so that's the positive bit of this. So if we wrap all of this together, the more power, maybe the less empathy. Your body predicts to save time. We know that can be good and bad, right? And then you've got your body budgeting in allostasis. So you're trying to manage your own body budget, but you're impacting others. There are all the beliefs that this country or this space or this geography is bringing to us. But actually, the really good thing is we are able to change and think for ourselves, and practice makes perfect. And we do form new neurons by simply practicing the art. And one of the things for those who have power is to practice the art of uncomfortability in a conversation. And if you haven't had to do it, you don't have the neurons. You don't actually have the resilience to do it. And all of us in this room, power is relational. It is not just about, in this moment, I have power, I'm a keynote. We all differ where and when we have power. And before I move on to section 3, to kind of wrap up, I want to leave you with this. I'm a Black British woman. I was born here. My parents were born in Barbados and Jamaica. I have friends from around the globe. It took me about 3 years into my research to have an epiphany and go, this is all from a white Western perspective. What am I doing? And so I started to look at Indigenous wisdom, wisdom from those who are Indigenous to a place, and it was very different. So their definition of power is different. We have what we call a singular definition. Essentially, the more people you have power over, the more powerful you are. Whoopee, more money, more big houses. Indigenous wisdom doesn't do that at all. It says you use your power in service of others. It expands it further. It says you have to consider on a daily basis the lives of those 7 generations past, as well as the potential for 7 generations future. Now, I'm limited in this talk today in terms of time, but I wanted to kind of give you all that information and then spin it round and let us understand context and place. Who's written the research that I'm talking about? Who hasn't? How will this impact this knowledge about prediction, body budgeting, empathy, democratic feudalism, but most importantly, neuroplasticity? What can you take away from it? So as I wrap up in the last 5 to 7 minutes, I want to go on to section 3, which is really about, that's all great, Suzanne, thanks. But how do we apply it on an everyday? So, as I said, I have been lucky enough to do some work with Rombert, who have really, they've opened Pandora's box. And I think they would say, oh, wow, once you start thinking about the role of a choreographer, then you start thinking about who's running the company. And then, so we've just taken a little bit of it, and they were really lovely. I rang them up and went, so I'm doing this keynote last minute. Do you think you could record something for me? And they were like, yeah, sure. So what we're going to hear next is something from their director of learning, Daniel, and he's just going to talk about what power and decolonizing and the practicalities of it mean through his lens as the director of learning. Melanie, can you take that away for us, please?
Hello, my name's Daniel Fulvio, and I am Director of Community Partnerships at Rombert. And we've got a cause that literally underlines everything we do. And it's what if there was a dance company where brilliant and daring people could show up and be supported to push themselves to move the world forward. Power is important because it informs everything within the cultural industries. We know, and there are so many studies about how they're not representative of the broader UK population. I feel for us, decolonization means like challenging and trying to dismantle sort of structures at every level within our organization, within the education system, because Romber's at the heart of GCSE and A-level dance, that have like unhelpfully contributed to the oppression of queer people, people from diverse ethnic backgrounds, marginalized people at all levels. And I think that we're sort of shaped by colonialism at every level. I think within the contents of Romber, decolonization is we're trying to kind of make it an active thing where we actively center marginalized people's knowledge, culture, and experience. An example of this was when we set up learning hubs that scrutinized problematic works that were on the GCSE and A-level dance syllabus. I think one example of how we're trying to redress that is with the actual creation of the learning resources for GCSE and A-level dance that were the result of the learning hubs we set up. We recognized that instead of sort of like relying on the usual gatekeepers to sort of write those works, create those works, we tried to create new power structures of alternative expertise by having a collective of voices and perspectives to actually write the resources. So within that collective, it was sort of going beyond the sort of usual gatekeepers to create the actual resources that were being used by teachers of GCSE and A-level dance. Benoit, who was our artistic director, has a mantra that he uses, which is, at Romber, dance is more than dance. And I think it's interesting that we sometimes don't think of ourselves actually as an actual dance company. We're about sort of really expanding who it is that has access to dance, whether that's bringing in work in earlier settings where we're working in Manchester, where there's some of the greatest health inequities, to embed contemporary dance in nursery settings to improve school readiness.
Thank you, Melanie. So the bit that I didn't manage to edit in, but just like a public thank you for Daniel for literally jumping on a Zoom and doing a recording with me this morning, is that actually so a lot of Romber's work is on the GCSE and A-level syllabus. And so once you start thinking about equitable spaces and you look at that, then you kind of have to go, well, actually, we do have a lot of power. Our work's on the syllabus. How do we deal with that when it is no longer of this time and moment? And I really wanted to bring that in because I wanted to give that really broad but specific understanding of this is how power can be used. This is how, for me, everything is about power, because power affects you 24 hours a day. Your relationship to power affects how you sleep. It affects your well-being. It affects every single conversation that you have. It affects how you parent or caregive for children. It affects how you are managed or led at work. And I think that really, if you're looking about and looking to a more equitable and resilient, sustainable space, you can't do that without thinking about power. And we have a little framework that I don't want to share now for time, but if anybody wants it, it's really just a 1 to 5 of how to have conversations. Then we'll share our details at the end. So a couple more things to wrap up. I think we had a pre-conversation and one of the other panelists also mentioned this. So I think they may talk about it. I don't want to talk about it too long. I started to think about, one of the briefs is, can you give us examples? It's like, Romber, great. Outside, I don't want to do. And one of the things that I learned about recently, and I want to give a credit to an artist called Dan de la Motte, whose work at the moment is looking at fungi. Yes, fungi, mushrooms, fungi. And fungi are not all good, yeah? So they create kind of chemicals that kill things off. But one of the things they do is that they share space really well. So there are things that trees can't do. Melanie, can we just show my beautiful picture? There are things that trees can't do, and that trees get the oxygen and fungi use it, and then fungi spread messages around. And I thought, actually, we like to center ourselves as human beings, right? But there are other forms of life that are doing it way better. And none of them are perfect. And this book actually is one that I saw somewhere and bought randomly, and me and Melanie are arguing over whether it's a children's book or an adult book. But it's a really interesting thing to look at and think about how you might apply that to yourself and your work. What could you learn from it? Melanie, can you move on to the power slide, please? So, two more things. One, our work is neurology of power. We believe everything's interconnected, and it makes our life really, really hard. But we think if you try and interconnect all of these P's and think about it through the lens of power, you have a better chance of succeeding. So think about your place, not just whether it's England. Think about place. Who are you working with? What's going on geographically? What is your purpose? And how are you able to do your purpose when you really think about power? Everything I've said. Who gets to do it? Who doesn't get to do it? What don't you know? What do you not want to know? I don't believe anyone should be doing any work without thinking about the planet. What I'd say there is, my dad is from Barbados. I spent so many years skint trying to set up a company. I didn't have time to think about climate change, and many people, when you intersect class and ethnicity, are trying to put food on the table. Not all, but a lot. So climate almost becomes a luxury. I say slightly embarrassed, because food comes first. And yet many of the countries that are most impacted, Barbados may not be there in 30 or 50 years because of climate change that they've had least impact on, they've contributed to least. So how do we interconnect all of these things? Profit is not a dirty word anywhere for me, but how are you using your profit? Who's getting to see that profit? Who benefits in a university? Who benefits anywhere? How do policies work? What impact do we have on policies? Who are the people involved? And if you look at that through the lens of power, you'll start to see an ecology which you can apply, hopefully, within the dance ecology. I want to wrap up with a bit of joy, actually. Absolutely nothing to do with dance. I don't know how many of you are into football. I just have to say this. I'm doing this reluctantly. I'm not an Arsenal supporter. I'm a Liverpool supporter, but this has been brilliant. Adidas are Arsenal's official team kit sponsor, and there is a beautiful fashion designer called Lebrum, and his work has always celebrated his history, but he works and lives here. And in terms of things that you could do, I'm not saying you want to go and work with Adidas tomorrow, but there are so many ways to collaborate and for everybody to win. And I love this. He's basically designed Arsenal's away kit. And this is the little video they produced as a celebration. Melanie.
From Africa to the Arsenal and back again. When people move, culture moves. And when cultures meet, it's magic. It creates leaders, entertainers, artists, champions, invincibles. We are all part of the fabric. The Arsenal family, home and away, stitched together by common threads.
Thank you, Melanie. You can take that off share. So that's really a wrap up of the end. I wanted to finish with something joyous. There are all sorts of questions. Nothing's perfect, right? If you look at that, we're still making clothes, we're still harming the planet, things are still being shipped, football tickets are still wildly expensive, it's not equitable. But there is something joyous about a fairly young fashion designer that gets to partner, that gets to sell more of his clothes, where they absolutely centre so much of what we've been talking about. Culture. Culture is what breathes life into us. And for me, dance is an essential part of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Turn my microphone on. I wasn't sure how to clap on Zoom. Thank you so much for the journey that you've taken us on. I can see other reactions there. So I have the job of sort of curating this conversation with you following this amazing keynote that you just offered. I was also the annoying one in the pre-meet who was asking for examples and tools. So I'm going to pick up from there, because you've given yourself your own trap when you mentioned that you've got a 5-step for how to have a conversation. I've been grappling with this idea that is linked to a quote by Audre Lorde: "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." So that is where I've been kind of trying to think about, okay, so how do we learn tools that are different from the masters, different from the ones that we've been programmed by, that we've been brought up with, or that we've learned through all of the conditioning of the various structures that have contained us and our ancestors and so on. So if you had to offer us some practical tools, so you mentioned some of your own journey about having to choosing to set up your own company because of not finding space or not finding, other rules of the game that would allow you to play the game that you wanted to play. So what would you say that are the tools that you've practiced, that you're advocating for in order for you through your work, and and to offer us as a way of kind of shifting things and moving things in a direction that is different from the one that is sort of dictated by the status quo?
I think, first of all, that path takes time and the resource of time. And if there's one thing that's scarce right now, everyone's trying to do more and less. So don't lie to yourself and say you want to get into it if you don't understand that. I would like to say you can bite little bits off and you can, but having a conversation to truly understand what's going on with another person takes time. The thing that we found, and we're only a team of 6 to 8, like even we get intensely frustrated trying to figure out what someone needs, why they need it, how they need it. I'm going to give you a bit of this framework just to start you off. So we've created a power conversation framework, 1 to 5. And it's based on body budgeting, allostasis. It's based on power and empathy, everything we've said. So you and I are having a conversation. One of us absolutely has more power than the other. Very rarely is it as equal as we think. And when you really sit with it, uncomfortable as it is, we know which one. Now, in that conversation, a 1 is that we both walk away from that conversation feeling okay. We may have put pennies into each other's body budget, but I definitely haven't walked away feeling like, oh, all my pennies have gone, and hopefully neither you. A 2 is that there's a little bit of risk now for someone. And that person is kind of like, yeah, I'm going to say I think it'll be okay. And the other person, but ultimately 1 still has more power and 1 has come out with just a few more pennies than the other out. 3 gets to the point where someone's like, I'm going to have this conversation. and they either realise before or after that it's going to cost them. Goes all the way to 5. 5 is that moment that I have been in way too many times, which is what made me set up my own company, where I'm like, bleep, 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 bleep in my head. I'm going to say this anyway, because it has to be said. I need to say it. I need to get it out of my body. But the cost to me, the cost is final. It's final in terms of something, your career, your job, your relationship. Now, the really tricky thing is in this modern world, and things are more nuanced, but ultimately, those people that have power, remember we talked about neuroplasticity. The thing about understanding you have power, feeling uncomfortable in a conversation doesn't mean you don't have power. It means you feel uncomfortable. And so if you're the person who holds the power in a conversation, you quite often may take the power and the uncomfortableness of having to have a conversation that you're not comfortable with actually being the person with least power. And so one of the things you can start to practice is, who am I in this conversation? And it takes time. And you start with little things, yeah? Don't start at the point when you've packed your bags and you're about to leave the house. That's not the moment. Start with something that feels quite safe. And it's like anything else, you build up resilience. You can do it in the workplace, you can do it with your friends, you can incorporate it into 360 reviews. And we do it, and it's really difficult. I started the organisation, I needed access support, we built access support, and then we suddenly realised, oh, actually, it can't all be about Suzanne's access support. So we have to have some very tricky conversations. Suzanne, this is what you say you need, but do you understand the impact on us? Do you understand what it's like when we travel with you and we're working from 8 in the morning till 8 in the evening, because we've got to make sure that you don't, have a PTSD moment and eat something that you can't eat, and then you can't deliver this, and then we've got to try and make sure you get in the right cab, and then at the same time we've got to make sure your PowerPoint. And those aren't easy conversations to have, but we've built up some resilience to that, and then you go to the next step. So does that answer your question?
I think it gives me a window. Yes, thank you.
Daniela, Vicky has a question, and Vicky, I don't know if you just want to come off mic so you can ask your question directly.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Suzanne. That was just such a, I actually found it very uplifting, in the current, I suppose, following the day's events. So thank you so much. I just have a question about, it's about money and profit and kind of ethical commercialization, I suppose. It's something I often think about in terms of contemporary dance. It's always been a cash-strapped kind of, niche market that in some ways has almost thrived on that, on that, I don't know, make, do and mend kind of philosophy, and kind of, we're all doing it ourselves. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about the potential for this field of contemporary dance to engage with initiatives, maybe like the Arsenal example, because I would immediately think, oh, well, we're not, we're not big enough a field to attract kind of major sponsorship. We're a small field with very little commercial heft. So do you think it's possible for us to attract larger sponsors or partners with financial clout? And have you got any suggestions how we might do that whilst not selling our souls to the corporates?
So we work with corporates, we work in public sector, we work a lot in the funded arts, MPOs, people who got funding from Arts Council. And so I bring all of that with a love of having worked for Swatch and Adidas and Barclaycard in the past. The first question that we always say to clients is like, what are you trying to do and why? The second question is, who's involved in doing that? Who's leading? Because and then who are your workforce? Who are your team? once you've done that, it isn't, you know, about going straight out and building a relationship to Adidas. I'm quite interested what they paid towards that. I suspect it wasn't a massive fee, right? It may be that Lebrun get residuals from the sales. I don't know. But what I do know for sure is that loads more people know about that brand now. What I do know for sure is that that brand means something to a lot of those footballers. And so my advice is to start, it's that ecology. Who are you? Who's involved? Because if you've got people who are involved, who reflect society, they have many more ideas and many more networks. Does that answer your question? Now, the last bit about money and capital. You know, this is being recorded. I'm probably going to do a blog post of my little bit, so never mind, I'm going to say it anyway. I am 59 and I got tired, really tired after Grenfell. Because I just said, if we watch that, and I think about some of the comments I heard after, what hope is there for us? COVID and George Floyd did me in. So I'm there for the revolution. I'm there. I'm absolutely there, right? I'm there for losing my job. I'm there for losing my company. I'm there for having no money. I'm there for having no food. Not sure I'm there for a physical fight because I'm a bit of a scaredy about that, right? But until then, there's a bit of me that's like this tension of, do I walk away? Do I stay? Do I try and make it change from the middle? And I think that's a tension we all have to live with. But while I am here, I do believe that profit doesn't need to be a dirty word. I think it's incredibly, we have teetered on the verge of going bankrupt so many times because we pay people for every single minute that they work. And that means that adds like 20% to our costs. We pay for my access costs. That adds another 20%. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's really, really hard. And I think there is a window right now where there are funders who genuinely want to know about that. And equally, there are some public authorities, West Midlands Combined Authority, who are really interested in putting in policies that really support the people they're in service of. And so I think you have to try and make that balance yourself. But no, I'm not a fan of capitalism. Yes, I'd be there for the revolution. I'm here where I am. I've done enough circles around the sun to see it kind of go round a bit. And all I can do is try to collaborate and run this company with the others that run it with me as best as I can. And make some choices that I'd rather not make as and when is needed. I just have to balance it up.
Thank you.
Okay, Daniela, there's Sarah Wookie who's just put some comments in the chat, just here talking about who gets to dance, what kind of dance methods there are, useful to share within the concern of social cohesion and different more equal distribution of power. She just made a note there how your reflection, Suzanne, have really given her a chance to think much more deeply. So just wanted to acknowledge that to you if you haven't seen that.
Thank you.
Would Sarah like to turn her mic on, or was this just a comment in the chat?
Yeah, I'll just jump in briefly. I'm mindful of time. Thank you, Suzanne. Yeah, I guess it's like, what kinds of dances are we talking about? And when we're talking about power, if we're talking about a classical ballet piece versus, let's say, a postmodern contemporary improvisational dance, we might be talking about very different structures of power within those dances when we kind of extract the methodologies or the methods of making them and what goes on within them. Is something I'm really interested in kind of teasing out. So it's not so much the product of dance and who dances, although I find that very important, but it's how we do it and what kind of dances we're talking about, because some might promote certain traditional methods of hierarchy and power, while others are challenging that. So I think it's just good to get clear when we talk about that, because dance, being a general term. So I know you've probably thought about that, but it just really activated my thinking. So thank you.
Yeah, I've got a bit of a response to that. I did some work with Banff Centre, which is on the site of Sacred Ground in Banff, Canada, and is given to the people there so long as they use it to teach Indigenous wisdom. Anyway, so I turned up and I was like, yeah, I'm all down for the revolution. And they were like, well, you could just try setting lots of little fires instead and then they'll connect. So, oh, yeah, because then I won't burn myself out. And the reason I say that is we have to start somewhere. And I say that and I don't believe it at the same time, but we have to start somewhere. And so there are definitely different beliefs, values, behaviors, levels of acceptability across different genres and forms of dance. And when I was at uni doing my master's, I went to a dance organization who I won't name because some of the hierarchies, and we got to like looking at people training, and people were in tears and it felt like bullying, and it was one of the very big reasons why I decided I didn't want to go and work for one of those big organizations, because I can't be there. And then you go to Rombert, who are about contemporary, and they're not doing everything right. That's not what I'm saying. But they're asking those questions and they're making change and they're thinking about succession planning. Do you know what I mean? Like, pick your poison. And also, I say this to you individually, like, people often come to me for mentoring and they're like, well, I've got into this organization and now it's, X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, the first bit of homework is to check where you're going. Do you have the capacity for that space at this moment for the next few years? And so even in dance, we have to choose where we choose to work and where we put our energy, because it's not all going to change, but it is going to change. If you look at many things have shifted over the last 20 years, not fast enough or far enough for me, but they have. I have to acknowledge that. So that's my answer to it. You're absolutely right. Across the disciplines and genres, very different things are happening. Know where you can be and where you can use your power well and where you can't.
Okay, Daniela, if there's time for one more question, I have something I'd like to ask Suzanne, if that would be okay.
Go for it.
Hi, Suzanne. Thanks for sharing your kind of ideas. I wondered if you might be able to talk a little bit more about the very kind of personal power that each of us might have that often might be hard for us to recognise. So it strikes me listening to you that there's something inherent in our personal power, which is about being able to see what we are able to choose at times. So when you were saying, I've got the power to slow down and listen to this conversation, or I've got the power to walk away from things. And I'm just wondering whether that's something in your work that is something that is addressed in terms of how we recognise for ourselves what some of those personal powers might be that can't really be taken from us.
Yeah, I think our work is all about creating financially resilient spaces. And for that to do that, it has to be wrapped around that ecology of what I showed you, power, place, purpose. One of the hardest things is around getting leaders to have that aha moment about all the times they shut down conversations and actions because power and privilege allows them to do it. I'm working with a genius called Mark Dakin at the moment, who was the ex-technical director of Royal Opera House. He's got this brilliant drawing, and where our work intersects is around trust and power. And if you truly want to lead or be in relationship or collaboration, there has to be trust. And if your power allows you to shut things down when you don't want to deal with them, you'll never have trust. And so one of those, that framework is about building up a resilience and an ability to just stop and go, actually, I'm feeling really uncomfortable. Why? Or to catch yourself when you shut things down or when you shut someone else down. But it is an actual choice. And neuroplasticity is a literal thing. It hurts your head to build new neurons. And so if you have power, you generally just go, I don't want that pain. But it's a literal thing. But you want to do it. It's one of our criteria. Does someone really want to do it, and why? Daniela, I know we're coming up to time if we haven't already.
Yes, I mean, you're the best timekeeper ever. Thank you, Suzanne. I think, Michelle, you were saying something, but you were muted, so we didn't hear that.
Yeah, no, I was just saying it's another great self-checking mechanism to just think, in this conversation, do I have the power to shut this down because I'm starting to feel uncomfortable? I can see how that could be a pattern of behaviour which people aren't even aware is happening at times. So that's a really helpful idea. Thank you.
The question of discomfort is a very interesting one for me, and you mentioned it a few times in your talk, so maybe it's something that we can return to in later conversations. Thank you once again for offering such a rich set of ideas and examples to really get us going with all of this thinking, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us and your experience. I hope you can stay, for as much as you can tonight. So thank you from me and from everyone. And I think this is the time when we're just going to take ourselves away from the screen for a little stretch for 15 minutes, and we'll keep the call going, but we'll turn cameras off and microphones off.
Okay. Before you do that, I think, Melanie, we didn't finish on the final slide. So I think there's a slide with all our details. We'll just whack it up for 10 seconds. If anyone wants to keep in touch, just take a picture with your phone.
And if you're happy to, we can leave it on for for a little bit during the break.
Code.
Yeah.
I think takes you somewhere on our website. Thank you, Melanie. Just drop us a line if you've any questions. Daniela, thank you so much for reaching out.
Thank you for accepting the invite.
Yeah. And I'll stay for a little bit, but have a lovely rest of the evening.
Thank you, Suzanne. And thank you, Melanie, too. We didn't get to see you, but we know you're there. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie.
So we'll be back at 6:15 for the next part of our evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming back, for being here. We are about to start our second part of the evening, following that fabulous keynote talk from Suzanne. Just a reminder that we have the chat facility for questions and feedback. And also, if you need audio captions on, then we have audio captions below. And we are recording this a session for our research purposes and for records and for people who can't be here. So if you want to turn your cameras off, you may do so as well. Okay, speakers. So we have Liz and we have Carl and we have Julia. Is everyone okay? Everyone happy with their Zoom and happy that they can, do what they need to do? Brilliant. Without further ado, then, I'm going to pass over to Julia, Julia Pond, who is the chair for the panel, and Thea Stanton, who is our Zoom monitor for the event. But Thea, I know you have to leave a little bit early. Yeah, okay, so I can take over from you at that moment. Just give me a hand wave so I know you're going, or put it in the chat. Yeah, lovely. Okay, thank you. Over to you, Julia.
Great, thanks, Vicky. We're so happy to welcome you, Liz, Carl, and Julia. We are going to hand over to each of you for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have some time, about 25 minutes at the end, to discuss, to reflect, to look at whatever comes up at the intersections between each of your offerings. I want to note that Liz is able to join us, but has a double duty with her festival that she's running in Austria. So she may at some point have to drop off, but we'll have you for as long as we have you and be happy about that. And so I think without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Liz, and just to say that Liz King is the founder and director of Dance Identity, which over the last 19 years has established itself as one of Austria's leading choreographic centers. And it has the aim to facilitate and nurture the creation and production of movement-based art and to relate this artistic practice and the reflection upon it to a broader spectrum of the community. So we're really looking to hear about those methods and ways that you have developed working, and that project of Dance Identity has come after a long career directing other dance companies throughout Europe, working in Ballet Stuttgart and directing Tanztheater Wien. And I'll let you introduce yourself further, Liz. Over to you. Oh, I think you're on mute. Yep, there we go.
Can you hear me now? Yes? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Liz.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for asking me to take part on strategies for dancing otherwise. And thank you, Suzanne, for the lovely, insightful talk, which you had before. Sorry, I was a little bit late for that, but luckily I can stay now for the rest of the evening. So I shall look forward to hearing other people speaking. You gave a very short and correct overview to my CV, which I'm happy that you've done, and why I started Dance Identity. I am actually 77 years old, so I've been dancing practically all my life and working with dancers, and it's given me a lot of beautiful energy, and therefore I'm very happy to talk about this. So I'm going to read I've written it down in advance because I've been asked to talk specifically about a program I did called Migrant Bodies. It was a European cultural project, and as I read this off, you will hear how that came about. So I did actually start, after my long career as a choreographer, I made the decision to investigate the potential of choreography as a means for sociality. After all, working with dancers teaches one about the value of sharing dynamic forces, turning things around, and that to dance is to embrace the power of life, whatever that might mean for you, but we'll find this out, each one in ourselves anyway. Understanding, so it goes on. Understanding where you are in your surroundings and assessing your proximity or distance to it, as one does when performing a choreographed dance piece, is also an interesting way to gain a perspective as to where you are within yourself. When dancers create the varying alignments or non-alignments to one another whilst dancing, such as extreme proximity or relative distance, it creates an alternative perception to the understanding, not just of spaces, but also of relationships. In order to launch my project, what I'm doing, Dance Identity, I needed a studio and was fortunate to acquire a large space in an old textile factory in the Austrian province of Burgenland, where I am now, which runs alongside the border with Hungary. By the way, this is not my sitting room. This is a hotel room. I'd like you to know those green curtains aren't mine. Having established a workplace, I went ahead and founded a platform to investigate the potential of the role dance may play in determining interactions in social and behavioral patterns among individuals from various backgrounds. I invited a group of 12 local citizens of varying ages and occupations and 5 young professional dancers to join me in researching methods for creating movement maps that would expand to become movement scores. The central focus of this new trajectory was to look into the depths of how dance may change the way we perceive things, especially among diverse communities. This investigation has shown me that dance and dancing is a shared human desire to express the things we cannot find in words. I guess we all know that, but I've said it all the same. Today, I will focus on a project in which Dance Identity was invited to participate and how the research we undertook proved a valuable tool for sharing with the fellow members of the 2-year project. The members of the partner countries and their associate artists each contributed with their learned tools and schools. Migrant Bodies project was supported by the EU Creative Europe programme. This is what they write on their website, so I'll read that off. Migrant Bodies develops a shared international research focusing on identifying, developing and testing new and relevant actions for the inclusion of refugees and migrants with dance and movement-based initiatives. The research brings together dance artists in Italy, Austria, Croatia and France in dialogue with writers, filmmakers, organizations and associations which assist refugees, educational institutions, universities, members of the partner organizations, experts and citizens. Inclusive dance practices are being conceived and held for migrants and refugees within the communities they live in, enabling project participants to gain new skills and enrich their professional life, embracing new opportunities in working with migrants. Migrants and refugees are invited in dance classes to events and performances, experiencing being part of a collective and live a common experience with citizens in theatres and artistic contexts. So that was what the EU project was. That was our overview of what we were doing. So from each of the 4 organizations, the different mentors and artists brought in their practices and their tools. And I'm going to talk about my own contribution, which is movement maps, which I've developed with these people. The research which I had undertaken with the dancers and local citizens had fortunately included around 8 locally placed, unaccompanied, underaged refugees and had covered a period of around 3 years. So I had been working with some refugees from Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, some from certain African countries, but mostly those first 3 countries. So they were placed locally in a home or in hotels. So during this time, with my local dance group of citizens, during this time, we were able to create a safe environment for everyone, meeting regularly once a week. We developed many strategies for communicating on a non-pre-knowledge basis, so that we were all researchers in unknown territory, which later proved a valuable tool for sharing with the fellow members of the Migrant Bodies project. Whether with experienced dance makers, experienced escapees of war-ridden territories, or with the lived experiences of the citizens from local communities, we set about creating fictitious maps as a collective community. How do we set about making the maps? Through collectively identifying points of reference within a given environment and then naming them with written or drawn icons on a score. We would then find we were able to navigate our movement journey as a group in the same way that voyagers of old would use the stars to travel across the desert. Through identifying particular spots within the chosen workspace, we collectively named those fictitious points of reference with coded names. We then proceed to write or draw the named codes on large pieces of paper. These then became the reference points on our maps and enabled us to navigate our journey. By choosing and naming together, participants were able to associate and identify with the imaginary environment they created, which in turn acted as a common language for the entire group. This encourages inclusivity. So it doesn't leave anything out. We all are on the same page when we start on this research together. Furthermore, by discussing and writing down instructions for investigation in the fictitious environment collectively, we encourage a shared sense of predicament in the as yet undiscovered terrain. This method of common naming and investigation avoids a hierarchy of pre-educated knowledge predominating and supports the right for each member of the group to exercise their experience just as they see it. As a result of deciphering a map collectively and by using the references written on the map as points of recognition, I have found that individuals in a non-habitual environment, such as asylum seekers or people with a disability, gain a sense of security. By creating and identifying common icons together with all members of the assembled community, we establish a common language with which everyone can associate. Although verbal communication is necessary in defining and naming the words to be written on the map, the deliverance is intended to be realized through the silence of the body. Executing the actions physically by using body language puts each person on the same page. Hence, the onlooker or vis-a-vis persons are obliged to read those actions by responding via their understanding of what has been shown. In this way, we begin to create an environment of common recognition so that any cultural or personal differences become less significant. So just to enhance that, once we've made the icons on the map, I actually ask everybody if we can go in little groups of 2 to 3, usually a refugee with one of the mostly older members of the local community, and work out sign language on their piece of paper. And then we ask each group to show their sign language. Then the others can go. It's something you have to do physically. It's hard to explain it. It really is. So we watch each other when they've made their body language visible from the map paging. Then others can walk and communicate with their body language that they've invented in their little group of 2 or 3. Eventually, everybody starts walking around the space with the different sign languages, and you find that people start responding. They mirror the sign language they're seeing, they challenge with theirs, and you get a conversation, literally a body conversation amongst these people. So that is an enhancement on that last bit. And then I'm just going to finish. Writing a map is extremely interactive and can produce some spectacular results, not just the figures and patterns that are created, but also the poetry, drama, and beauty, which evolves from implementing a movement map. This is stunning. The impact of the emotional subtext that emerges through working on the map together verifies my theory that experiences, memories, and emotions that are embedded in the deeper layers of personal experiences will emerge naturally when an individual is given a safe environment of trust and recognition to work in. As participants work together, little things from life that are common to all societies and cultures, such as tenderness, aloneness, frustration, dilemma, comforting or cuddling, begin to show. It is all these things that make up whom we are. So that's my speech for today, and it's a pleasure to be able to share it with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was fantastic. Let's move to Carl J. Lewin. Are you okay to go next? I think Julia had something that she felt would go really well at the last.
Sure. Hello.
Yeah. Hello. Would you like, I can introduce you a little bit, or you can introduce yourself, whatever you prefer.
If you begin introducing me while I figure out how to take my big face off the main view, can someone just give me a bit of a tip on how? Do I just do hide self view?
I think you've just
Yeah.
done it, removing the spotlight.
Yeah. Anyway,
I think
I'm not looking at myself now, which is good.
we're big welcome to Carl J. Lewin. He is a Scotland-based choreographer, curator, and performer working since 1995. He likes to push boundaries, explore edges, recontextualize, and generally mix things up a bit. His current work includes At Once by Deborah Hay and Extremely Pedestrian Chorales by Carl and Matteo Fargione. He's the artistic director of Dance North Scotland, curating and directing their annual Rise Festival of Contemporary Dance and Performance. Dance North Scotland prides itself on a collaborative operating culture with a commitment to transparency and inclusive decision-making. I'll hand over to you, Carl.
Oh, good. I'm very full with what's already been said by Suzanne and Liz, and most of my mind is like a kind of rich soup of lots of ideas and terms. What I asked Vicky, but also Julia, maybe you could help me, that if I meander off and wander off topic, or actually if I just meander off screen altogether because I can't see myself, so I do kind of fidget and move around, please call me back on topic or back into screen. So I'll just say a little bit about myself. So my name's Carl. I am 61-year-old white man, cisgendered white man. I'm English by birth. I was brought up in Lancashire in the north west of England. I've been living in Scotland now in this area of Findhorn, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute, for longer than the town I was brought up. I still feel very much, there's one way of thinking about it, is as an Englishman abroad. Still feel like, in many ways, a visitor or a guest, even though I've been here now for 25 years, and my children, who are now both two adult children, were brought up here. There's still this sense of a guest, which I guess would also inform about what I do and how I practice. So where I'm based is up in the north east of Scotland, and which way around would it be? This way. So if you think of, for those of you who don't know, Scotland, very sort of northern bit of Scotland, and Orkney and Shetland up further north. There's a bit sort of around the kind of witch's hat, as they say, with this area of seas called the Moray Firth, and we are on the Moray Firth. So in the inlet bit of the Moray Firth is Inverness. It's our closest city. It's about 40 minutes drive from here, and we are sort of along the coast. If you follow all the way, come down past Aberdeen and down to Edinburgh. It gives you an idea of where we are. It's about 4 hours drive north of Edinburgh and Glasgow. And it's pretty rural, but it's also quite interesting and quite unique because where I'm based is in an eco-village. So it's quite an international community. We're on a peninsula. On the peninsula, there is at the end of the peninsula, there's an old fishing village of Findhorn, which has been there about 250 years longer than the community here. And on the other side of our other neighbours, is actually a military base. It's now an army barracks. It used to be a Royal Air Force base. So when I first arrived here, actually in my early 20s, I was here for a little bit and I went away. The taxi driver talked about the three communities that were on the peninsula as strange bedfellows: the military base, what was then really, as we talked about, as a new age community, I guess, and then the old fishing village. So where I am, just in the break, I just stepped outside from our office. I'm in the Dance North office, and the pink-footed geese were flying over in the dark to roost on the bay. Several thousand of them roost on the bay over the winter. It's about a 15-20 minute walk through the dunes, not through any roads, to the open sea, to the beach. So we're surrounded by nature, which also has a sort of big influence on who I am and what we do. So I am the the artistic director or creative director, sometimes we talk about, of Dance North, which is an organisation which I founded, but I don't tend to push that sort of founder to the forefront, because for me, sense of collaborative work, I'm never doing anything on my own. I'm always doing things in relationship. And actually, I was thinking when coming into my time on the screen, I was thinking this is quite a challenging context for me to have a conversation, because there's a few of you across there who are staying on screen, and there's a lot of names. And it's the sense of kind of removed. I'm a very physical, very tactile person, and I like to be in the room with people. And I was thinking about, I was trying to imagine what I might talk about. I was reminded of the dance practice contact improvisation, which was a really huge part of the main part of my dance practice for many, many years. And one of the things that I really loved about that is that I didn't have to figure out what to do until I came into contact with somebody. And actually the contact, the relationship was gave me a point to start with. And then I was thinking, well, how do I do that here? When I'm in an office on my own, I'm in a shared office space. There's 5 other offices in the building. Everyone's gone home. It's very dark. There's me and there's you in the boxes. This sense of how do I share what I'm interested in without that sense of relationship, my favorite relationship, which is human beings in a room together. So yes, creative director of Dance North. I'm also an artist. I work under my own name. I favour collaborative practice, which I feel like after many, many years I've arrived at now, where I feel like I have a sense of fairly robust, I would say in some ways, collaborative relationships, where there's a sense of really making a stand for each other and for own ideas. I loved what Suzanne was talking about, the body pennies. I love that sense of that there might be an exchange, that the pennies might pull backwards and forth sometimes. And I'm also in a sort of third part of my work at the moment, an interest is trying to set up and establish a different model of producing dance, as we call it. That part of the dance, being an artist that takes care of the management, the fundraising, the logistics, the enabling of the artists and the dancers to come together to make work. To look at what maybe is a different model, which is artist-centered, but also works collaboratively. And that's been kind of interesting process to looking at how we might bring together different organizations and other individuals to work collectively, and bringing together people to the table or the space for a particular job and task, which has been very much informed by do with Dance North. I was thinking, one of the things that's kind of jumping out on my paper is, one of the things I'd looked at, I so wish I was a good planner and be prepared, but it's not one of my strengths. So I do like to just sort of arrive with where I'm at, and I have got a crib sheet of notes which Vicky helped prepare a week or so ago, and it's now full of chaotic drawings and words. But one of the things that is jumping out at me at the moment is the why, the how, and the what. And something I've been really interested in recently is remembering and coming back to the why I'm doing things, or why we are doing something. And I find that sometimes, generally in the world, but also within the world of dance, there's a lot of focus on the what, with perhaps a disconnection from the why. So I think starting with the why are we doing this? And I think from that point, I'll just say that the why of Dance North, it used to be called Body Serve Scotland, was in the very, very early days when I left London and came to live up here in Fintorn after 9 years being away. And I had lots of questions about, I knew it was the right place to be. I wanted to be in a rural environment. I wanted to be by the sea. I felt very happy, and there's a spaciousness here which I really appreciated and liked. And I began to think, oh, how can I make my life as an artist, as a dancer, sustainable? And the thing that occurred to me was, if I put on some really cool, interesting activity with interesting and cool teachers and performers, that would probably attract lots of people I'd like to hang out with. So that was kind of this sort of the beginnings of back then Body Surf Scotland and then Dance North. And I think there's something about that which is just good to remember, that when we're faced with such sort of existential crises in the world and in the planet, we're often encouraged or tend to talk about doing things. Suzanne talked about, when she spoke at the Indigenous communities, about the future generations of doing it for our children and our children's children. But I also think there's something that is of value and worthwhile for doing something that is worthwhile and beneficial, and feeds me. But it has, and I think if I can do that in a way with real integrity, that is also a generous act. In the same way, talking about, if I put on something sort of interesting that people want to come to, I get to benefit. So just remember that in terms of the why. I think what I'd like to talk, and I've got no idea when I started, so you have to keep an eye on what we've got. Just talking about the how, I think that in Dance North as an organisation, as Julia said in the introduction, we sort of pride ourselves in many ways of this collaborative way of organising, of working together. We encourage each other to think in terms of a we rather than I, even though I am the role of the artistic director and I get to the privilege of curating our RISE festival. We have a financial manager, we have an internal operations lead, we have a marketing person, and no one aspect of our activity is brought about in isolation. So it would feel disingenuous for me to talk about my festival, for example. And the way that we structure our organisation, while there's two of us who are executive board members and staff and certainly have a sort of power and rank within the organisation, when it comes to the day-to-day, week-to-week activities, we try the best we can to see us as equals within the office. So if I'm talking about curating a festival, I'm having conversations and negotiations with our main festival producer and our financial manager as equals. As an executive director, myself and Liz, who's my colleague, have an area of responsibility which is that other people don't have. So there is that kind of rank there. But as much as possible, we're thinking about collaborative culture. And my background sort of politically really was, I was interested in anarchism. I'm not sure whether I would say I was an anarchist anymore, although someone did bring Emma Goldman's little book, Anarchism, What It Really Means, the other day, so it's still there as an influence. But I began to be interested in how we might draw examples and models from nature to inform what we do, and particularly mycelium, the network of fungal rhizome that connects different within ecosystems and connects different ecosystems. Also looked a little bit at kind of rhizome theory, which I found pretty impenetrable as a sort of philosophy. But looking at how it might inform how we operate. And I can give a couple of examples in a minute. And what I realized is, whereas previously in my wanting to encourage people to sort of challenge the way or how we did things, people lost interest in listening to me harp on about anarchism very quickly, but people seem a lot more interested in wanting to talk about mushrooms. So that gave me a lot of encouragement in following that as a model. What I got really interested in is mycelium and rhizomes in general, with things like it not having a center. There is no hub. And I began to think about how so much of the language that we use to describe what we do, was drawing from these quite hierarchical structures. And people talk about the arboreal model of the tree, which is used when we think about the tree of life and of knowledge and of education structures. And that the rhizome or the mycelium was something that didn't have a center, that information and nutrients flowed down through the sort of mycorrhizal strands in two directions. That it wasn't saying, and I also like the kind of mycelium, we often talk about flat structures, which for me conjures up this idea of two dimensions. And I realize that as an organization or as a collective of people or social thing, it's not two-dimensional, it's three-dimensional. Of course, the sort of mycelium is three-dimensional. It goes down and up as well as sides. And things like if things are severed, like the kind of the mycorrhizal strands find the sort of necessary pathways between the different nodes. And we began to experiment with ideas like, well, if we were to put Dance North into that model, what would be a node? Would it be an individual? Would it be another organization? Would it be resources? And we began to also think about how one of the theories and properties of a rhizome or mycelium is that every node or every kind of living thing has the potential for a direct connection to something else, to another thing, depending on need. So we're thinking, well, if we applied that within an organization, then that would mean that any one person could have access to any other person. And any one person could have access to resources. And then we began to realize that that had a lot of resonance with how we were working, but it encouraged us to go further. So the idea of, we dispense with the idea of line management, which often implies that the idea, if I'm at the bottom of the tree, then the only way that I'm going to get, I have to go to the next person. And if there's a few nods, so people understand what we're talking about. But also the resources within an organization. So we made sure that, I mean, enshrined, if you like, within the principles and the policies of the organization, is that everybody has access to everything. That everybody knows what everybody else earns. Everybody has access to the budgets. The only documents that we have a team of, when we're at full complement, it's 7 people between 2 and full-time, 2 days and full-time. But everybody has access to the company budgets. Everyone has access to our kind of email accounts and such like that. We don't micromanage or read of each other's emails. The only thing that people don't have access to is confidential HR. Is that my time?
I'm just giving you a little nudge on time. Yeah.
Great. How many more minutes have I got?
-2 officially.
-2. Okay, well, and so that gets you kind of a bit of an idea of how we operate. I think I'll just very quickly then just talk about my own artistic practice, where I wanted to really look at kind of collaboration. So Matteo and I are making a new piece of work. It's called If I Can't Dance, I'm Not Coming, which actually takes an Emma Goldman misattributed quote, where she's supposed to have said, if I can't dance, it's not my revolution, or I'm not. She never actually said that. That was about a slogan on a t-shirt in the 70s. But we've taken the if I can't dance, it's not my revolution, to an extreme, which is like, if I can't dance, I'm just not coming. And it's an octet, and what we've been exploring with in concerns the decentering is the idea that, can we give each member of the cast full directorial and choreographic control over a different section of the piece, which demands that Matteo and I get out of the way. And yeah, I could talk a lot more about mother trees and giving up power, which is what I was hoping to get to, but maybe another time.
Maybe we can return back to that after Julia in the discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Time goes quick.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Carl. That's fantastic. Let's move to Julia Casalini. Their practice spans across curating, performance, writing, and research. Their eco-transfeminist and queer activism has the scope of building and bridging communities across the globe through the arts and nature cultures. They've recently completed their PhD research exploring queer transfeminist performance art from transnational and anti-colonial perspectives. Over to you, Julia.
Thank you, Julia. And something that I just noticed I didn't write in my bio is actually what I'm doing right now, which can serve for people that don't know what I'm actually doing, because it's very abstract, this bio. So after I finished my PhD, which I completed in January, I spent some time in the Philippines where I collaborated with a Filipina transgender artist and activist for a British Council-funded project. And we created a video work on pre-colonial Filipino mythology. And I'm also finishing a film that I did together with my partner Niabi in Ghana in 2022. We filmed it there whilst we were in Ghana. I was there for my field research for the PhD, and the documentary about the transgender performance activist Va bene li Camfiazzi is coming up now soon. We're gonna screen it in Amsterdam and Berlin in December, and I'm still looking for some venue that will all sit in the UK. Yes, I'm working on an exhibition that will open in January 2025 at Mimosa House Gallery in London. It's gonna stay for a month, and it's called Burnt House Horizons. And we are working with learning from a Neolithic civilization from the area of present-day Ukraine, Romania, Moldova. And that civilization is called Cucuteni Tripillia, and we are learning from their methods and speculating also through their histories and what has not been left behind, because they used to burn down their settlements. We are kind of speculating queer futures and thinking about ourselves as future ancestors. So that will be an exciting exhibition. And we started working on it already on a residency and various workshops with communities of queer homeless people and queer Eastern European refugees. And in the past, I've run an organization called Contemporary, spelled with C-I-U-N-T, Cant, Temporary. And that's been running for 7 years. And curating a lot of events, including live art night called Deep Trash, and having a sister organization called Archivio Queer Italia. Whilst in the meantime, I was also producing independent work. I worked with dance artists like Malik Nashad Sharp or Reed Rashes, formerly known as Edith Woolley. During my PhD, I worked with Amanda Pina, who is a Chilean-Mexican choreographer based in Vienna. And and worked at the same time in an art gallery in London called Richa Saltoon. So I'm here now, and I will start the presentation. Share. So how to enact the dance pluriverse? What strategies do I have to propose to organize otherwise? As I am about to respond to these questions, I refrain from prescribing a solution. Instead, I would like to stop and try to examine how I and we, working across academia and the arts, have all been complicit of enacting oppression. Because who is not even a little bit guilty of it when working in a system that is steeped in extractive, accelerational capitalist modes of relating and making? A system whose institutional foundations are colonial, extractive, and exclusionary. I have been thinking a lot lately about the etymological origin of the term curating, which comes from the Latin curare, meaning to care for, take care of, or to heal. In this sense, we are all curators in one way or another, because we are all involved in acts of caring for ourselves or for others, humans, animals, plants, or other non-human beings. So I would like to stop and think at how can curating in the arts and beyond not reproduce violence, but rather become an act of actual healing. So here is my first question for us. How have we used curating to enhance our own ego or career? Have we been extractive of other people's resources or even of our own? Can we recenter healing into curating with the aim of deeply caring for our human and non-human relationships? I am asking these questions from the perspective of someone who has intensely worked in the visual and performing arts sector for over a decade, as a curator, gallery assistant, gallery manager, producer, PhD student, lecturer, artist, writer, researcher, support worker, and so on. But especially, I'm saying this as someone who, at the end of her first 7 years of working in the arts, in the end of her 20s, had a health collapse due to the increasing stress and toxic work patterns that I pushed myself into for the good cause of platforming queer and feminist art practices. As I was pursuing what I most believed in and loved with my art and activism, I forgot to stop, to laugh, to dance, and to rest. Hence, my second question is, could we structure our days around rest rather than work? Or could work itself become restful? Take a deep breath with me. My energetic healer says that the adrenal glands in my body are overproducing because they keep on responding to constant stress stimuli. Adrenal glands should be activated in such ways only in situations of actual threat. But modern work culture has made stress and the fear of scarcity a necessary ingredient for us to depend on. In capitalist times, everything is urgent and everything must happen as fast as possible so that we can keep afloat in an economy that drags us downwards through the constant promise of accumulation. But as Trisha Hersey, the founder of the NAP ministry, says, we hold ourselves and others to the lie of urgency. In my experience, which is shared by many freelancers in the arts, I often find myself in a perpetual fight or flight mode, a feeling that for me is exacerbated by the semantic violence of the word deadlines. Deadlines keep on haunting me every day. How not to be stressed within a system that performatively threatens you with death on a daily basis? In How to Do Nothing, Jenny Odell speaks about how doing nothing should not be at the service of being more productive later on, which is what our capitalist work culture wants us to do, but to be more in tune with ourselves in the present time, with the place we occupy and those who are around us. For an interesting pun, I realized that in doing nothing, the age falls and nothing emerges. Henceforth, as we do nothing, we might also be noticing our bodies, our sensations, and our inextricable interrelation with the non-human, with the land that surrounds us and of which we are constituted. In the past months, I have forced myself to place hours of unproductive time within my work schedule by doing activities like meditating, napping, humming, walking in nature, singing, sunbathing, switching off the phone, reading tarot, doing rituals, ecstatic dancing, sensing with the plants and their tinctures. Whilst doing exactly what is considered as unproductive from a capitalist perspective, I have noticed an important shift in the ways I perceive the world and the ways it manifests to me. I have started feeling the land as a fully living and sacred being that also traverses me and constitutes my whole self within the cyclicity of life and death. This teaching is vital in a time where the earth cannot regenerate anymore its own resources because of the pace we consume them. As we are witnessing the extreme consequences of climate and environmental collapse, it is urgent for us to not just understand this conceptually, but to feel it within our bodies. Which leads me to a third question, which I will start with an invitation first. I invite you to close your eyes and touch your hands, your arms, your elbows. Maybe you can give yourself a hug. And then touch the table, your chair, or your cushion. If that is available to you, you can reach out to the leaves of a plant that knows you, or the soil in which it is planted. As you keep on touching the plant, the soil, the chair, the table, or your skin, I invite you to sense your own body as land. Because everything that is around us and everybody comes from the earth. And eventually, we will all go back to it, burnt by the fire, eaten by worms, or decomposed by mushrooms. Question: can you feel the land in your flesh? And if our body is also land, will this knowledge change the way that we care for the land? How can we, as producers and makers of art, dance, and performance, facilitate this shift in perception? This shift can be better understood within a pluriversal perspective. The pluriverse, a concept introduced by the Zapatistas in Chiapas through land-based indigenous and local perspectives, proposes the practice of a word of many words. From a pluriversal perspective, reality is constituted by many interconnected words, ontologies, ways of being, ways of knowing, and experimenting. The pluriverse is fundamental to understand that, for instance, whereas some consider mountains and forests as resources, others see them as persons who are imbued with spirit. Therefore, if we understand the construction of Western modernity as the dominant knowledge system, we have to shift our attention to the importance of alternative worldviews and alternative ways of world building. Even if, as Marisol de la Cadena says, they do not satisfy our demand, the demand of modern epistemology, to prove their reality, as they do not leave historical evidence, let alone scientific. So here is my fourth macro question. How we, as cultural producers, are navigating the complexities of working within and across these different worldviews. For instance, by programming an animist dance ritual within the wideness of the institution, or by working transnationally with artists from the global majority. How do we create the space for these cultural differences to encounter each other with kindness, love, and respect, by listening deeply to each other, without assumptions or the modern colonial need of requesting intelligibility from what needs to stay opaque? How can we harness our, at times, incommensurable differences by working together through collaborative, loving, and generous, rather than coercive, modalities of world building? Although I have experienced working transnationally across cultural differences, most recently in Ghana, Philippines, and Brazil, and in general with artists of various migrant and diasporic backgrounds, it would be arrogant for me to declare that I have the solutions to a pluriversal and decolonial work praxis, since the decolonial work is never done. But I would like to point at the important work that a radical pluriversal pedagogy that takes into account indigenous and non-indigenous worldview can do for us right now. As I have been part of the work done by the collective Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures by attending a 6-week course based on Vanessa Machado de Oliveira's book, Hospicing Modernity, and a 1-week residency in a land in Portugal this summer, of which you can see a photo, I would like to end my presentation by offering some of the teachings or medicines that have been working within me since months, and that I know for sure that will stay with me for the years to come. In her book, Vanessa Machado de Oliveira calls for recovering exiled capacities, the capacities to dig deeper and relate wider. Modernity or coloniality keeps on systematically suppressing these capacities by making us forget, so that we can believe in what modernity or coloniality wants us to desire. I will share the 4 main denials that de Oliveira points at, and that restrict our capacity to sense, relate, and imagine otherwise. The denial of systemic, historical, and ongoing violence and complicity in harm, or how our comforts, securities, and enjoyments are subsidized through expropriating and exploiting elsewhere. The denial of the limits of the planet and of the unsustainability of modernity coloniality, or how the Earth metabolism cannot sustain such exponential growth, consumption, and expropriation indefinitely. The denial of the entanglement, or how we insist on seeing ourselves as separate from each other and from the land. The denial of the magnitude and the complexity of the problems that we need to face, or how we tend to look for simple solutions that make us feel or look good, and that may address the symptoms, but not the root causes of our problems. As we try to grapple with the complexity of our problems and our entangled lives, I wish to leave us with a final question. How do we metabolize the complexity of the problems that we face as the world, as we know it, cannot keep on functioning anymore? What if we center the land, rest, degrowth, and healing in our production, curation, and art-making practices? It might take us a lifetime to work through these and many other similar questions, and we will have to work through them not just by the means of the intellect, reason, and language, but also and foremost through our bodies, our senses, and the non-verbal. It is essential that we keep on working through such decolonial frameworks to enact a dense pluriverse, without ever forgetting the complexities arising from working within the belly of the beast of the modern colonial system without denials. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. We are going to have a little time to discuss with the 3 of you. Thank you for such rich offerings. I'm really struck by a couple commonalities. One, talking about place and kind of the idea of map making, situating ourselves, and how that relates to Suzanne's talking about place and understanding where we are in relationship to each other, and that coming through in the question of who makes the maps came to me with Liz's beautiful example of map making and giving the map making to people who don't usually make them. And then this other common thread of learning from nature's forms. What if, learning from mycelium in Carl's, this is a really inspiring example of creating a concrete organizational practice inspired by nature. And Julia, your ideas brought up the question, you know, what might it be if our work as artists kind of grew and died in rhythms that are more like the land, the way plants grow and die and change, and the way landscapes shift. Just to, I think to start, I wondered if I wanted to bring back this notion of discomfort from the first part of the evening, and to ask if any of you or all of you might feel able to speak to how discomfort manifests in your work, particularly around the work of inclusion or the work of changing the narrative, dismantling hierarchies. So feel free to just jump in.
But in the meantime, I just shared a few calculators that really respond to the question how to feel discomfort. Yeah, it's very interesting to calculate, even if approximately, like, how many planets would we need if everyone was living the life that we live, and when is the world finishing its resources if everyone was living our life. Yeah, and the other one is the slavery footprint based on the things that we possess, like objects and things, how many slaves have been worked, enslaved people have been worked for us, basically. This has made me feel quite uncomfortable, and it's a very productive tool. I feel the discomfort, and it's a shame Vanessa couldn't come today, but I hope for the best for her health. And she speaks a lot about facing the shit, the literal and metaphorical shit. And I keep on thinking about that. And what she brings out is that in Western colonial modernity, we're all trying to hide the shit and not looking at it, where we are flushing it away. And same with regards to like recycling and where our products are coming from. Like we're fine with living with the comforts and by discarding what makes us feeling uncomfortable. So yeah, in my perspective, like bringing this knowledge into like maybe like curating, working with artists collaboratively, I think it is important to highlight to talk about the problems that might arise. And it could be a good strategy to start a collaboration by pointing out the possible problems or tensions, making a sort of risk assessment of the relationship. I'm still learning. I don't have solutions, so it's gonna be in my practice and in my way of working in the future years. But it could be a good solution to like check in with each other from the very beginning and try to analyze what problems might be arising from our collaborations. And throughout the process, continue to check in with each other before meetings or before starting working together. I think it's very important to reconnect to our bodies and to the land. Many times I feel that I am so absorbed by the emailing and production and logistic part of things and the computer and this repetitive mechanic work patterns that I forget that my body is land and that I do get energized. I do get energy just by being in in the land. And one one day a week of switching off the computer or the phone, it is also energizing, like being out away from technology and touching trees or touching the soil. Like if I just touch the soil in my plants, plant pots in the house, I really feel less stressed. And yeah.
Thanks,
So
Julia.
the connection with the land is definitely like something that can heal our relationships.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Julia. Yeah, wonderful. Liz?
Yeah. Well, having worked my whole life, as it were, amongst dancers of every kind of, different backgrounds, cultures, continents, I've come to the conclusion that the body itself never lies. So when we're talking about people who, in our group, it could be ourselves, everybody gets uptight about something at some point or another, you will see it in their body. And if you live dance, and I say live dance because I would like to take a little bit away the criticism of being in a dance company, because I've been in the position of being a dancer in a big company. Yes, it was hierarchical. That is partly why I decided to leave and go into physical theatre and then make my own with other people. Nevertheless, that is almost animalistic. It's also true to nature. There will always be moments when people either want to be told what to do, and then there might be in the group a small revolution. So you're living out mini social structures all the time in a dance company. This is also why I moved away to try to dance sociality with all sorts of other people together, so we could find out new rules, or not new rules, but I didn't talk about it necessarily. We got on with it. But my conclusion is that we all need to learn again to trust the intelligence of the body. And that doesn't mean to say you must always be good. Sometimes bodies want to be angry. They want to flail around, and that I think has to be accepted again, first of all in ourselves, and as tools to use in little exercises in offices, I don't know where. I think that it gets too into the mind, in my opinion, and I've read up a lot about the biology of mind and body. Actually, the mind, the brain, is influenced by the body. So the body comes first. There's an argument about that, I've been told. I'm not an academic, but my little observation about working with people in groups.
Yes, Carl.
Discomfort, being uncomfortable. I mean, I just think, kind of, Liz, I would say one step further around the mind-body. I think that it's not about a mind-body connection. I think it's mind-body together.
Yeah.
There is no separation. So we often talk about mind-body connection as if they're two different things. So I think maybe that's where you were sort of heading towards. I think being uncomfortable, discomfort, and comfortability, is that a word? I don't know. But it's, for me, it's about, I was thinking, well, it depends on what I'm engaging with. When I have a chronic health condition, and when I'm talking about discomfort there, it might be guiding me towards being more comfortable and easing back from things. But in another area, I mean, one area which I acknowledged when I began to do more conscious and open work around anti-racism and looking at sort of my own bias, and then introduced to the idea of the concept of white fragility, and Robin DiAngelo's work, I think, is where it came from, of realizing that I was hiding behind my own discomfort, that I was so afraid of getting it wrong and being seen to get it wrong and having to experience the discomfort of getting it wrong, that I wasn't actually doing anything. So that was the discomfort, or the feeling of the discomfort was there already. It wasn't like I was silly afraid of experiencing it. It was already there. I was living it day to day. It's there. It was like a call to action. So there I kind of, so for me, it's maybe it's about discomfort, or uncomfortability is about a little bit of a call to pay attention. And sometimes that might mean me to retreat to the couch and the fire and my knitting and be warm and cozy and well. And other times it might be to step out into unfamiliar territory, into beyond what we always talk about, outside of your comfort zone. I'm thinking also about aging, because there's something about this kind of Zoom kind of keeps on highlighting kind of wrinkles and saggy bits. And I'm thinking, well, I'm often in the aging process, I'm having to learn to become more comfortable and accepting of that aging process. But there's always it always begins with the discomfort. When I notice something on Zoom or in the mirror, and I go, oh my God, I don't like that. I want it to go away. I want it to hide it, or I'm going to zip up. Then actually that is a call for something. There's a calling for some attention. And that's when I enter into the fascination, following the fascination, the curiosity. What is it? It might call me to the couch. It might call me just to make peace with my own body. It might call me to step out and risk getting it wrong. I think that's, and then there's this, you know, we don't want to put ourselves in well, I'm going to say don't put ourselves in danger, but actually there's plenty of places in the world at the moment where actually people are being called to put themselves in danger and risk and lose their lives. So maybe that's actually sort of caught myself out there, that it's, yeah, maybe it's just about a call to examine, question, where's that going to take me?
It makes me think about discomfort as a way of mapping and sort of sensing areas where you feel a sort of ease or comfort, and areas that are sort of more challenging, or where boundaries are, and how we orient towards those. In the dance industry, you know, whether we feel comfortable and intimate with a dance company context, or with a more sort of collaborative, collective context, how we feel comfortable organizing, and who that might include or exclude, who might be welcome at that, in those spaces and at that table.
It also brings the question is, what Suzanne was talking about, the pennies, which I love, is like the impact. What impact do I have on the people? So there's discomfort in relating to myself, how I'm feeling, but there's also if and how my behavior is going to create or trigger or cause discomfort in others. And when that is just the way it is, and maybe needs to be, but when also I would need to step back. And I think I'm quite fascinated by what the measures are, the internal measures. I mean, when do we go that bit further? When do we not? When do we take care of ourselves? When do we take care of somebody else? And I've got no answers, but I'm just quite fascinated between what is that internal barometer. So maybe there's
and like locating ourselves as good people or kind people, and what is it to possibly release that, because we're all gonna hurt each other sometimes inadvertently, or you know, it's how can we move into some kind of acknowledgement of our relationality that is, you know, open space for that.
I think we should be very compassionate towards ourselves and towards others, and always be open to learn from our mistakes, and to make new mistakes, not repeat the old ones, and be open to learn.
Yes, I don't think there's anything wrong with people breaking out with a freak out or something, if that's in them. And I think to tiptoe around is repressing those natural forces, you could say, that we carry. And this is what fascinates me about dance, especially, is that why actually I went into dance, why I love it, is that dance carries those forces for me. That means I dance them out. And if you're in a group and you can get moving together, and some will jerk around. I mean, remember the discos back in the 60s when I was a young one, you know, you'd see these freaky, and it was another way of expressing probably I've thought back about, and we used to go, no, yeah, that's a funny chap there. But they were getting it out. People were more into dancing in discos, and I don't know what, I think they do have still dance places, but it seems that people have left their bodies very much lately, to me, because I work a lot with young people. Don't think that I don't have to do with young people all the time here. They're coming tomorrow to show they've had research, Colombians, Russian, Ukrainian, Austrian, young people who are dance makers, as they call them now. And they have been researching really interesting subjects. The Colombian lady is a beautiful dancer, and she found out that I had been working at a home. I was asked to do this by somebody in my citizens group with people from mental illness. That means they, if I may say it, they're subject to paranoid schizophrenia. And I was allowed to be able to dance with them. And I mean, I was 73 when I started doing that. It taught me so much. It was so beautiful. The intelligence in these people was phenomenal because we trusted each other, and that trust made them feel much happier. They talked about it, and this Colombian lady heard about that and said, Liz, can I come down with you? She's only, 26 or something like that, 28. And I'd love to sort of work with you on that, or work with the people. And she's now reflecting that subjective emotions that she felt as a Colombian. She's, if I may use that word, indigenous. She's a born person from Colombia. She's obviously of that, not somebody who arrived in Colombia. I don't know how I should put that politically correctly, but that's what she is. And it's fascinating. She's making a piece, and she's going to show it on Saturday, her piece with a South Korean man together. I don't know what they'll be doing, but they've been working on it, and amongst others. So what I'm saying is getting back in the body and understanding what the body is saying. For me, this is a very important thing to bring into a conversation in society generally.
One of the things I was just thinking about in terms of this conversation generally is this idea of getting away from absolutes. Maybe that's another way of thinking about the decentering, the getting away from absolute truths or particular ways. And as you were making reference to sort of hierarchies and non-hierarchical structures or forms. So I was talking about the mycelium and then the arboreal, the tree sort of approach. There are no trees without mycelium. It's, the trees are wonderful, beautiful things too. And they take drawing on that as a model for a particular way of organizing is relevant in particular situations and not others. And I think the idea that we present one particular way, that's part of why the world we're living in is such a mess, whether it's to do with religions or political ideologies. I was listening to a podcast this morning when I was making my breakfast. It was a health podcast. He was interviewing a scientist who was basically saying, I don't know. We haven't got the research yet. And the presenter was talking about how reassuring that was to have somebody who was an expert in a field saying, I don't know, rather than an expert in a field that was presenting something as being as a truth, an absolute truth. So maybe this about this decentering, that there isn't one particular way. A tree is beautiful. It's no more miraculous than a tiny mushroom, and one might be more visible. You don't want to, and the example I often use a lot within my working environment is the different forms of leadership. And collaborative, cooperative working within Dance North, when we're looking at setting our activity for a year, is great. You don't want to exit a building that is on fire by committee.
Thank you, Carl. I think that's a really wonderful way to sort of start to wrap this up, because I'm conscious that we need to do a whole group close. So I'm gonna hand back over to Vicky for that, but not without thanking you, Liz King, Carl Lewin, and Julia Casalini, for this really rich conversation. So thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Great.
Vicky?
Thank you so much. I'm gonna remove people's spotlights, and then we will all hopefully be in the same Zoom space together. Let me just remove that one. We should all be coming. There we go. We've all come back. Now, thank you first and foremost to all our wonderful presenters this evening and discussants and Zoom monitors and chairs. You've been absolutely fantastic. We did say that we would go into some breakout rooms and have some discussions, but I'm getting a feeling from the rapidly dwindling audience that we've maybe reached that point of exhaustion, and that we've reached a stage in the evening where we are just mulling over these rich conversations. And if anybody would like to take some conversations, if I've misjudged that in any way, then feel free to kind of, connect with people. And I would say go to the pub, but that's just not going to happen because we're all on Zoom, or go wherever you want to go. But please do keep in contact with us. We will post the recording on the website so you can catch up with anything you haven't done. And if you have any questions for our presenters, we're happy to kind of pass those on, or you can contact them directly. I just wanted to kind of wrap up a little bit in terms of thinking about, I was thinking about what have we learned this evening then about enacting the pluriverse. We've learned some things about structures, for sure, people sharing about different ways of structuring and thinking about organizing work-life balance, line management as a dispersed form. We've thought about approaches, people very generously sharing their tactics and scores. I've just noticed, Joan, is there a way to be in contact with this group? Yes, I think so. I think we can, there's another way of being in touch with this group, which is to come along to one of our in-person events, which is happening, one of them is happening on the 15th in Bath, and then the other event, our final symposium, is happening in February next year. So there's that way of getting in touch, but also you could make a note here of people's names and things, and we will also save the Zoom chat, so we can kind of reconvene there and contact with other people. Just going back to my notes, we've also heard about personal responsibility leading to collective and communal change. What is our role there? And we've also heard about starting from where we are, but also asking where we are and who we are as we operate in relation to the conditions or situations or institutions in which we find ourselves. And Suzanne made a really interesting point about that, is that where you want to be? Is that where you can make change or affect change, which I thought was really interesting. Yeah, we've got strategies there for kind of keeping in touch with the project. Yeah, I think that's enough from me. I wondered if anyone else from the Dancing Otherwise team wanted to add a few final thoughts. No, they seem quite happy.
I will, Vicky. Sorry, I couldn't find my mic.
There you go, Michelle.
Too big and it had disappeared off. I just wanted to thank everybody for the contributions. And there's something that is I'm going to take away from me in terms of some things that I've been pondering on as I've been taking notes from people's conversations. And it's the idea that there is so much that is invisible to us, and that perhaps we can only be held accountable for the things that we can become consciously aware of. And there's been a lot of conversations tonight about how difficult some of the challenges are that we're trying to face. And I wonder whether, in particular, listening to Julia's talk, the idea that it feels like an investment to do the work, to find different ways to do things. And I wonder how often I think, well, what will be the return for the work I do? It's almost like I can see I have a mindset Where if I'm going to do something, I want it to reach an end point. I want to see that something has progressed or resolved itself. But when I look at the challenges we face, I kind of think in the lifetime I have, I might be able to understand the problems, expose the problems, try my best to explain them and connect with others. And that might be all there's time for me to do. So it makes me kind of reflect on problem solving and a means to an endness with things that I'm going to ponder. That's it.
Great, thank you, Michelle. And
Thank you.
Daniela has a point.
Well, a reflection following on from Michelle, kind of thinking that kind of reaching that point of awareness, however unreachable it is however our responsibility, in the sense that it's sort of like a practice that we need to continue to practice. And we've kind of evoked and invoked our absent keynote tonight, Vanessa de Oliveira Andreotti, and in her book Hospice in Modernity, she talks about this methodology that she calls the methodology of the bus, where she sees each individual as a bus. We each have multiple positionalities within ourselves, and will be a different one on the driver's seat in different moments or in different circumstances, but being aware of all of the passengers on our bus, which means of all of the different positionalities, the different investments, the different perspectives that we each contain within ourselves, is our own responsibility, in the sense that also allows us then to understand difference in others, because we, if we start recognizing it within ourselves, our own discomforts, our own, investment in the status quo, because it enables us, once we recognize that it is preventing somebody else from accessing positions of power and so on, we can also be honest enough and recognize that it has enabled us differently, and shaped our position and our journey so far. So kind of, as uncomfortable as it is, and as a kind of never-ending job as it is, it feels that this, is kind of a practice that is worth becoming familiar with and acknowledging as kind of part of the bigger picture of what we all aim to do. Just as a thought. But there is Joan, who's
Thank you both. Thank you, Daniela. Joan.
Hello. Hello from the United States. I'm so sorry. Yeah, we will keep moving. I just am so grateful to have spent the afternoon, in my case, with this group of people who are wrestling with the issues I am wrestling with, who are thinking deeply and letting the discomfort flow. And I am limping along in my best understanding of how to be an artist in this world, and just noticing again the issues that are brought up here of the search for comfort, when that's not the point. So I'm just grateful for all of you. I just wanted to share that.
Wow, thank you, Joan. That feels like the perfect place to end. So thank you for so generously offering that, and honestly, and from a place of vulnerability, and from a place that has undergone quite a significant event today. So on that end, please do keep in touch via our events that are coming up on the website, or revisit past events to find out more about our research and our work. We also have a call out for a small amount of funding for offshoot research projects or meetings, research events, which could be the case that you've attended something or you've read something on the website or seen something that's been going on as part of this network and it's inspired you, or you're curious about something, or you really want to get in a room with other people. So there's some travel money, some money to fund travel and venue and catering, basically. So if you want to get together and, or you could do something on Zoom, for example, there's a little bit of funding to support that. So we have that call out there. Julia just popped it in the chat there. It's a funding opportunity. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love for someone else to be, you know, again, trying to disperse the power, for other groups to organize something and invite us in, or not. You know, we can respond, we can attend online, or we could travel to come and attend your event as well. So it's an attempt to ask or address a question about who else is coming with us. You know, we get these pots of funding as academics, but who else didn't get that money, or who else didn't get an opportunity, and who else are we bringing with us? So please, if you're interested, do respond to the call, and it would be really great to hear your spin and how, you know, this work has resonated in your fields of practice, research, doing, thinking, talking, relating. Yeah, so I think that's everything from me, apart from to say